Greetings. My name is Cameron Miller, and this is Trinity Place in Geneva, New York. And today is a reflection on Pentecost of sorts. Since it is Pentecost, I'm going to preach my core theology, my bedrock. Now, you've heard it before, one way or another, because I like to think it is biblical bedrock too. I spend a lot of airtime, as you know, pointing to where the Bible is metaphorical or even mythological. But today, with that reading from Ezekiel that we had, we can actually stand on a fixed date, even a fixed day. Ezekiel begins his book of prophecy by telling us, in the 13th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day, while I was among exiles by the Kibar River, the heavens were opened and I saw a vision. So that would be July 31st, 593 BCE. Actual day. But I want to now jump, knowing where we started, I want to jump 27 centuries to the 1800s in the United States. Imagine yourself as a 19th century slave owner in the southern United States, and you want your African slaves to have religion. As a pious, church-going Christian, probably an Episcopalian in those days, you feel an obligation to proselytize your slaves and to give them a chance at salvation. I know, the irony and the hypocrisy is mind-boggling, but it was a dominant concern. So, you read the stories, the Bible stories, to your slaves, or have somebody do it. And one of your favorite stories is that Ezekiel reading from the Valley of the Dry Bones. But then sometime after you have read them that story, you begin to hear your slaves singing about those bones and how those bones live. And you feel all warm inside and proud of yourself for having taught your slaves faith. Or, just to add some breadth to this imaginative escapade, let's say you're a European colonialist in Africa and you own thousands of acres on which you farm and mine and use local labor to extract the resources of the land to send back home to Britain or Germany or Belgium. Let's say that part of your personal ethos is to support the local missionaries whose job it is to make good Christians of the natives, which of course means to civilize them. You hear the minister preach to your workers from Bible stories like Dry Bones, and you think it's quaint. Okay. So that's Ezekiel, the Valley of the Dry Bones, as viewed from the box seats at the symphony or the opera. Now let's hear Dry Bones from the point of view of slaves and those whose land has been stolen from them, even as they are forced to work the land for those who stole it. Slave owners and colonialists are deaf to certain notes in the biblical score. They hear a good cinematic story and they see a Disney-like animation of scattered and dusty dry bones miraculously bouncing up and being woven back into life. It's sort of like a scene from Fantasia. Piece by piece, organ by organ, ligament by ligament, the bones reintegrate until suddenly the wind infuses the dead with life. It's a CPR from the lips of God to those dry bones. But the slaves, they hear something else. The slave who's planting cotton or cutting down sugar cane, or the Chinese railroad worker in South Africa, or the Indian miner in Congo all hear something different from what the slave owners and the colonialists hear. Yes, they hear the poetry of the dry bones, but underneath it they hear music. They hear a drum beating a steady rhythm to which those in the box seats are deaf. They hear God, and they feel freedom pulsating. Did you ever wonder why 19th century slave spirituals were so dominated by Old Testament themes? Or did you ever wonder why Latin American and South African liberation theology is so infused with the stories of Israel, even more so than the New Testament stories? It's because their ears perked up when they heard their oppressors glibly reading stories about a people called Israel who were once slaves, who through an act of God escaped, who formed a small but mighty nation, who fell to another empire, and who were taken away in slavery again, who sat by the rivers of Babylon and wept because they thought they would never be free again, who heard the question, "Mortal, can these bones live?" and who knew the answer. Unlike their oppressors, they knew that God was talking to them about their freedom. Slave, can you be free? Indigenous person, can your land be restored? Can your bones live? Can the scattered, dry, blown bones of your people live? Whether it's Ezekiel prophesying to the exiles that they can and will be restored, or the bereft disciples being promised that they will have an advocate even without Jesus, the biblical story challenges us with the question, can God act? Does God act? Will God act? So let's bring that forward. Each and every one of us has a personal valley of dry bones. A painful grief, a debilitating depression, a captivating addiction, an acute loneliness, a broken relationship, an open, oozing wound of the soul. Do we believe that God can do a new thing? Do we believe that God can and will do new things, even with us, even within us, even to us? Let's now then climb up to a 50,000-foot view and look out upon the national and even the global valley of dry bones. Wars waged for corrupt reasons, an abatement of civil liberties and human rights, cruel disparity of wealth, segregation along every conceivable social boundary, crime and violence of a breadth and a brutality that just boggles the mind, environmental degradation for profit that's threatening all of us. Do we believe that God can do a new thing? Even for us, even with us, even to us. Well, here's my assertion. History itself is the poetry of God doing new things. Hold that for a moment, swish it around in your brain, and let it palpitate in your heart. History is the poetry of God doing new things. I know. Believe me, I know. That's not easily digested idea in our quantifiable, observable, and economic reality. How do you prove that God is doing a new thing? And when the new things are taking place and they can no longer be denied, how can you prove that God is the author of the new things, or even an invisible hand guiding the market? Well, going back to the 19th century, there were many victims of colonialist oppression and the atrocity of slavery. And many of them could answer the question, yes, these bones can live. And yet, there have always been people who could answer, yes, these bones can live. Frederick Douglass said yes. Susan Anthony said yes. Dorothy Day said yes. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said yes. Mahatma Gandhi said yes. Martin Luther King Jr. said yes. Abraham Heschel said yes. Nelson Mandela said yes. Desmond Tutu said yes. Alicia Garza said yes. They were all too experienced in the true and painful ways of the world to be engaged in wishful thinking. Instead, their yes was authentic hope. Wishful thinking says yes and waits for it to happen. Authentic hope says yes and helps make it happen. So the case I want to make, and it's not likely to ever be proven or replicated in a laboratory or generated by a computer model, but the case I want to make is that nothing is hopeless, because if we humans move together for reconciliation and peace, then God is present and God acts. But likewise, if we do not, God does not. God's not an enabler of codependency. When we humans act together, and we move together, and we struggle for all the right things together, then God acts and it happens. That's what hope is made of. Slavery did not end by God waving a proverbial hand to make it disappear. Slavery was made illegal by a mighty, sustained, and costly human effort in which God was present and through which God acted. Colonialism did not come crashing down because God loved it one day and dismissed it the next. Colonialism began disintegrating, and still is, with a concerted struggle by millions of people to cast it off and lift it up, and through them, God acted. If we want to slow and survive climate change, then we humans simply must come together and struggle for liberation and restoration so that God will act and make it possible. It is true on a personal level as well. Whatever has dried your bones, whatever pain, whatever grief, whatever wound, whatever sorrow, keep working it. Keep struggling with it. Keep reaching out and asking others to join your struggle and help you. And if you do, God will act. Indeed, even now, God has acted through your efforts. Ezekiel or Pentecost, that's what this is all about. We act and God acts. Like I said, there's no proving it, but I believe it. In fact, I've seen it. I say yes to it. Can these bones live? Yes.